Hey friends, time for us to begin our verse-by-verse study of the great book of some of the Acts of some of the Apostles. Look forward to being with you, looking at some things hopefully that'll strengthen our faith. We're in Acts chapter 16. We saw earlier the conversion of Lydia and her household. This is Paul's second missionary journey. He's got traveling companions that factor in this story. We'll look at another conversion by the end of this chapter. These are, again, in the city of Philippi, a Roman colony. This is Europe as we think about the introduction of the gospel there. So a lot of interesting things here. Let's see what we can uncover in these texts. Verse 16 says, "Now it happened as we went to prayer that a certain slave girl possessed with the spirit of divination met us, who brought her masters much profit by fortune telling." Let me make a connection here. We went to prayer. Remember how, and it's easy to just pass over this verse so quickly in this phrase, they met on the Sabbath day down at the riverside where people were assembled to pray. And so they meet Lydia in her household, they teach them the gospel, they're baptized. And so it's as if they're saying, well, with this nice interruption, this very pleasing kind of a sidelight, we're going to get back to our purpose for coming. They're praying. So this certain slave girl, I feel sorry for her. I think about the description, and I think about a lot of people in today's society, people living in 2022, who are kind of at the mercy of their handlers. There are people we think about and kind of the senior side of life, sex traffickers, predators on children, those who abuse those. And so here's a girl, she's a slave girl, and she's possessed with this, the Bible calls it a spirit of divination. Literally it's a python spirit. There's kind of connection back to mythology and a lot of the maybe just not factual things at all, but suppositions. But we don't know exactly what she had, but they at least believe that she had the power to tell fortunes or something. And so they're looking at her as a means of not really honoring her, not seeing her as a person of value intrinsically, but rather what she can do for others. You get the idea that these masters, that word is used plural, we don't know if there are two or more, they basically held her and used her for the purposes of their own profit. And so it's sad today that people do that. And so this girl, there seems to be some kind of a supernatural force at play here. When she followed Paul, verse 17, Paul and us, by the way, Luke, the author of the book of Acts there, is present as well, as he used that personal pronoun. She cried out saying, "These men are the servants of the Most High God, who proclaim to us the way of salvation." Now, the reason I'm believing that there's some kind of a supernatural thing here is this girl, if it weren't for this spirit, how would she know who they were? How would she know what their purpose was? And so there's going to be a revelation on her part of something that's going to be instructive, but in a very different way than usual. These men all of a sudden aren't concerned about profit, or rather they're very concerned about losing their livelihood through her misappropriation of her talents there. And then don't miss verse 18 where it says, "This she did for many days." Paul and Silas are teaching, she's following them, she's going around and saying again, these men are servants of the Most High God. They're teaching us the way of salvation. Many days. We don't know how many, but it wasn't just a one-time occurrence, in other words. And then Paul, later in that same verse, greatly annoyed, turned and said to the Spirit. Notice it doesn't say that he turned to the girl. He understands, as we think about unclean spirits and demons and these words that are used sometimes interchangeably, sometimes with maybe a little bit different flavor or dimension. He says to the Spirit, this spirit who had knowledge, kind of like in a demonic sense of who they were, he says to the Spirit, "I command you in the name of Jesus Christ to come out of her." So these masters didn't think much of the girl unless she's able to pad their pockets. Paul looks at her as an innocent victim. And so he's not annoyed with her. When it says he's greatly annoyed, I think it's at the prospect of what he sees here is a very very dicey relationship she has with these fortune tellers. The Bible says that he came out of her that very hour, this spirit. It's used in the masculine sense there. But when her master saw that their hope of profit was gone, they seized Paul and Silas and dragged them into the marketplace to the authorities. Now, this girl with the spirit of divination, whatever it was, these men looked on her as an object. And then when the demon's cast out and she's just, she's at herself for really the first time, they're not rejoicing in that. They're not happy. All they can see is a loss of their livelihood. They're going to actually have to get out and get a real job, if you will. And so they can't do that. They're going to have religious persecution is on their minds, in other words. Drag them, Paul and Silas, to the marketplace, to the authorities. Now watch what happens. In verse 20, they brought them to the magistrates, which would have been the Roman authorities, and said, "These men, being Jews, exceedingly trouble our city." Now, one point, they are Jewish. Paul is, he is by his heritage. Formerly, he was religiously Jewish. They don't make the distinction that they're Christians or that somehow the teaching and preaching of Jesus is what they're about. But again, they're really not concerned about the facts anyway, are they? They're trying to get these men to stop it. And maybe their hope is that spirit could come back into the girl and their livelihood could be reestablished there. And so they exceedingly trouble our city. You know, it's not the first time, not the last time that people will say that Christianity, Jesus, pollutes society. We are a threat or a menace to functioning society. We as Christians kind of look at it the opposite way. We think about evil and the lack of Christianity being a detrimental force in the community. And so we can't stop the impression or getting the accusations made against believers at all. That is increasingly going to be an issue in our society, obviously, here. And so they go on to say this: they teach customs which are not lawful for us, being Romans, to receive or observe. Now, we're not sure what customs they had in mind. Maybe it's just the idea that we Romans are essentially pagan, and if they are Jewish, then they're trying to force their religion on us. They're trying to cram it down our throats. Doesn't that seem commonplace today as you think about how these different attacks or approaches are given there? They brought them to the magistrates, and it says the multitude rose up together against them. So if they are rabble rousers, they've roused the rabble. These men don't like it. Look at the aggression here. Magistrates tore off their clothes and commanded them to be beaten with rods. They go very quickly from a mere accusation to physical punishment being meted out. It seems like if there's any semblance of following a course of action or wanting to be lawful, that's kind of dispensed with. Hey, let's attack first, and then we'll find out later if that was the appropriate thing to do. So when they had laid many stripes on them, many stripes, there's possibility that it wasn't the 40. Often they would do 39 stripes because 40 was the limit. In case they miscounted, they didn't want to. They wanted a little buffer there. This might have been an unlimited beating. These men might have really been cruelly mistreated there, again, with exposed backs at that. And so the many stripes are on them. They threw them into prison, commanding the jailer to keep them securely. And having received such a charge, he put them in the inner prison, fastened their feet with stocks. There was no concern for comfort of prisoners. There was no concern for well-treatment. Items like decent food and water, maybe bathroom facilities would have been laughed at, scoffed at back then. I know some of our prisons, our jails today aren't very sanitary. There's maybe no concern for the dignity of human life there. But back then, I'm going to say it's probably much worse back in Paul and Silas's day. Imagine this day. They're still thrilled. It's just been a matter of a few days since the conversion of Lydia and her household. They're trying to kind of find a base of operations there. This servant girl following them, a nuisance. And so this benevolent thing of casting the demon out is a means of all of a sudden in just a short time, maybe within an hour, they've been dragged before this Roman assembly. They've been beaten, maybe perhaps even nearly to the point of the loss of their life. And then they're thrown in this prison and their feet in stocks. That would have been a means of kind of forcing a posture that would have been very uncomfortable. It's designed for misery, and so it's a very sad state of affairs. You wonder what's going on in Silas's mind and Paul's mind. You wonder if Lydia and her household had found out about that, if they were praying for them. And so in life, we look at the unfairness, we look at the inequality of certain things. Was it right and fair that Paul, with no other crime here than simply preaching and teaching the gospel, having the power to cast out a spirit of divination out of this young, defenseless girl? Is that really a crime worthy of what they were given here? What's going to happen? If you didn't know the outcome, would you think this chapter would end on a positive note? Watch. Let me suggest as we read these next couple of verses, and we will not finish all of this story about the conversion of the jailer, and that's kind of a teaser already. But there's some things to realize. Maybe you're at a point in life and you're in the valley. You've seen the mountaintop, or at least been uphill, but it doesn't even seem like you can even see where the next rise is going to be. God's still there. God doesn't abandon his children. God is faithful to us, even if we're unfaithful to him. It calls for a measure of patience for us to say, you know what? I don't care what life throws at me. I don't care if it is fair or not. I'm going to do the next best thing. I'm going to keep on being a servant, letting my light shine for him. Because the next verse, Acts 16:25, says, "But at midnight Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God." After having been beaten, adding the insult to the injury, the many stripes laid on them, feet in stocks, no comfort to be found. The inner prison would have been extremely dark. If you were claustrophobic, or if you were afraid of the dark, not a place for you. Many prisoners in such a place would have been cursing, ranting, raving, making life miserable, wanting others to feel as bad as they did. I don't know that anyone had ever done what Paul and Silas did, and that is to pray to God and sing hymns to him. So much so that the Bible says that the prisoners were listening to them. And I wonder what these prisoners thought. Who are these two? What have they done? Who is this God they're praying to? What are they saying in these strange songs to us? Maybe most of the prisoners only knew drinking songs or very secular or sexualized songs. And so what a stark contrast to most of the clientele in that facility. And God's a God of surprises. And life's going to throw some curveballs. Here's one, an earthquake. I'm convinced this is a divinely sent earthquake, not just a happenstance, a coincidental thing at all. Suddenly there was a great earthquake, so that the foundations of the prison were shaken, and immediately all the doors were open, everyone's chains were loosed. I wonder if this was kind of a selective earthquake. You don't see all the walls coming down. It's almost as if it was advantageously placed to where the chains are loosed. And so the foundations there, the keeper of the prison, the jailer, awakening from sleep, seeing the prison doors open, supposing the prisoners had fled, drew his sword and was about to kill himself. This corresponds with what we know with kind of the practice back then. If you lost a prisoner, if there was an escapee, that jailer, the one in charge, answered with his life. Their life was taken, and so there was extreme caution not to let that happen. And so do you almost feel sorry for the jailer? We don't know what his religious persuasion was, if he had any. Maybe he had been hardened because of the nature of his job and the clientele he served there. And so he's simply hastening. This is an episode-induced suicidal tendency he has here. He's wanting to end his life because he knows the higher-ups are going to do it for him. Maybe he thinks he can do it more quickly and mercifully than they would. But watch, again, the next surprise, the next bend around the turn there. It says that Paul called with a loud voice, saying, "Do yourself no harm, for we are all here." Now, if there's an earthquake, if there were a tornado, and it affected a prison, and then some people had the capacity to leave, don't you imagine the natural tendency is run, quick, get out of town, hide. Not only were Paul and Silas still there, presumably when Paul says, "We are all here," the other prisoners didn't flee either. And so you've got no reason to kill yourself. All of us are accounted for. Look at that stark surprise there. He called for a light, he ran in, and fell down trembling before Paul and Silas. Perhaps he had heard the praying and the singing and perceived something different about this couple, this pair of unusual prisoners on that occasion. And he brought them out and said, "Sirs, what must I do to be saved?" 3 times in the book of Acts, you find a version of this question, "What must I do to be saved?" Now, I read somewhere recently that there are about 3,300 questions in the Bible. Not a more important one than this one right here. What must I do to be saved? In our ladies' class Thursday, we were talking about this very text, actually, and the insinuation that maybe he wasn't asking about his soul's salvation. How can I be spared? But I think the environment here, the wording seems to indicate it is not his physical life, but his spiritual life. And I want you to think about the answers that's given. You can go ahead and read it for yourself, study on it. And note, by the way, in Acts chapter 2 and Acts chapter 9, the previous 2 occasions where a variety of that question is asked, "What must I do to be saved?" different answers are given. When I say different, not contradictory, not conflicting, but different from the standpoint of person. If you ask how far Gallatin is from Madison, someone might say, well, 15, maybe 17 miles. And if someone in Hendersonville, how far is Gallatin? Well, it's depending on what side, maybe 7 to 9 miles, something like that. And you get a little closer and, well, just about 3 miles. Well, why 3 different answers? Well, you're 3 different lengths away from the town. And so you're addressing the people on the basis of where they are. That's one of the answers, one of the ways of kind of harmonizing the different responses given to the question. When we take this up, Lord willing, next Sunday afternoon, we'll think about the answer that's given, what must I do to be saved? What it can say about salvation today and how it dovetails beautifully with the other accounts in the book of Acts. Thank you for studying along with us. 5 o'clock this afternoon at the Pike, we'll be having Digging Deeper. We'll be looking at some discussion groups, exploring the temptation of Jesus and the application for us. I'm looking forward to that with my church family. God bless you. Be praying for all those that are in need of prayer and help in any way. Look forward to next time we get together.